Sign whatever your brother puts in front of you. It's the least you can do after everything we've sacrificed for this family. My mother said it the same way she asked me to pass the salt flat, automatic, like my signature was already hers to spend. Across the dinner table, my brother leaned back in his chair with that smile I had memorized since childhood, the one that meant he had already won before the game started. My father was staring at his phone. Nobody was looking at me. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I folded my napkin, set it beside my untouched plate, and said I needed to think about it. My mother laughed. What is there to think about, Maya? You work in insurance. You understand these things. Just make it easy for once in your life. I picked up my purse and walked out of their house, past the family photos on the wall where my brother took up 3 frames, and I was in the corner of one, half cropped out. They thought I was being difficult. They didn't know I had already seen the documents. Have you ever been asked to protect someone who had been quietly destroying you for years? Leave me a comment. I read every single one. My name is Maya. I'm 31 years old. And for most of my life, I was the family's emergency fund with a heartbeat. It started the summer I turned 17. My brother was 20, home from his first semester of college with failing grades and a new girlfriend who wore expensive perfume. My parents sat me down at the kitchen table and explained, very calmly, that tuition was tighter than expected. They needed me to pick up extra shifts at the pharmacy where I worked weekends. Not for long, my mother said, just until your brother gets settled. I worked every Saturday and Sunday for the next 2 years. I missed my senior prom because I had a closing shift, and we needed the overtime. I paid for my own textbooks, my own gas, my own everything. My brother came home for Christmas that year driving a used BMW my parents had co-signed without telling me. He parked it in the driveway and asked if I could move my bike. I tell you this not because I want sympathy. I tell you this because you need to understand the architecture of what was built in that house. My brother was the investment. I was the operating cost they kept trying to reduce. And for a long time, I believed that was just how families worked. That love had a hierarchy, and I was simply lower on it. I carried that belief into my 20s like a weight I thought was normal, until I met Nate, and he looked at me one evening while I was stress-eating crackers over a phone call from my mother asking for money, and he said very quietly, "You know you're allowed to say no." I had never heard those words arranged in that order directed at me before. I married him 8 months later. By the time my brother came to me with his plan, I had built something real. I had a position as a senior claims investigator at a regional insurance company, a job I had earned methodically over 6 years, while my brother floated between sales roles and startup ideas that dissolved within a year. Nate had grown his small, contracting business into something legitimate, a team of 12, steady commercial contracts, a reputation that preceded him. We had a house. We had a savings account with actual savings in it. We had a life that nobody had handed us. And my brother, who had been handed nearly everything, was about to ask me to hand him the rest. The plan, as he presented it at that family dinner, was simple on the surface. He had launched a home renovation company 6 months earlier. It was growing, he said. Deals were closing. But he needed a larger line of credit to take on bigger projects, and the bank wanted a co-signer with verifiable income and a clean credit history. He looked at me when he said, "Clean credit history." My parents nodded along as if he were describing a business school case study. My father said it was a generational opportunity. My mother said family supports family. My brother said the cosign was just a formality. Just paperwork, Maya. It means nothing unless something goes wrong, and nothing is going to go wrong. I asked how much. He said $200,000. My mother said I was being dramatic when I didn't answer immediately. My father said I needed to stop thinking like an accountant and start thinking like a family member. My brother said he had done the math, and the business would be profitable within 18 months. He had a folder with projections. He slid it across the table with the confidence of someone who had never once been told no by the people in that room. I took the folder. I said I needed to review it. My mother sighed like I had just announced I was moving to another country. My brother said, "Don't overthink it." My father said, "We're counting on you, Maya." I drove home that night and sat in the kitchen while Nate made tea, and I laid out every page of that folder on the table between us. Nate is not a financial analyst. He is a man who built a business by reading contracts carefully and never signing anything he didn't fully understand. He looked at the projections for 11 minutes without saying anything. Then he looked up and said, "These revenue numbers start high and only go up. There are no slow months. There's no line item for payroll taxes. Who made this?" I said my brother did. Nate said that explains it and went back to reading. But I already knew something Nate didn't. I had known it for 4 days, since a file had crossed my desk at work that made the air go out of the room. My company handles commercial property and liability claims across a 5-state region. We process hundreds of claims a month. I do not personally investigate everyone, but I am the person who reviews flagged files. And 3 months into my brother's business operation, his company name had appeared in our system twice. 2 separate claims. 2 separate properties, both involving water damage during renovation. Both filed within 60 days of each other. Both for amounts just under the threshold that would trigger mandatory third-party review. I had flagged them myself before I realized whose company it was. When I saw the name, I felt something cold settle in my chest. I did not unflag them. I did not touch the files again. I forwarded them to our Special Investigations Unit and said nothing to anyone. I did not tell my brother any of this at dinner. I did not tell my parents. I said I needed to think about it, and I walked out, and I sat with what I knew for 4 more days, while my phone filled with texts from my mother asking why I was making everything so difficult, and voicemails from my brother saying it was just a cosign. Just paperwork. Stop being so selfish. And one long message from my father explaining that my brother had potential and I had stability, and stability's job was to support potential. My father had been delivering variations of this speech my entire life. He never seemed to notice that my stability had been purchased entirely by myself, without anyone co-signing anything for me. On the 5th day, I called my brother and told him I couldn't co-sign. I said it calmly. I said I was sorry. He said, "You're not sorry. You're just jealous that I'm finally doing something that matters." I said I hoped the business went well. He hung up on me. 20 minutes later, my mother called and said I had broken his heart. An hour after that, my father called and said I had always been the difficult one. That evening, my brother sent a group text to the extended family saying he was devastated that not everyone in the family believed in him, and several aunts and cousins responded with heart emojis and encouragement directed entirely at him. Nobody texted me. That was on a Tuesday. By Friday, my brother had called in a favor with a family friend who ran a small credit union and managed to get a much smaller line of credit without my signature. He texted me to let me know he didn't need me after all. I read it 3 times. Then I put my phone face down and went back to the report I was writing. The Special Investigations Unit had been working quietly for 6 weeks. I was not officially on the case. I had recused myself from any direct involvement the moment I recognized the company name. But I am good at my job because I understand how fraud happens, not in dramatic heists, but in small, confident miscalculations. People who commit insurance fraud almost always believe they are smarter than the system reviewing them. They file just under the trigger threshold. They use real contractor names on fake invoices. They photograph actual damage from unrelated sources. They rely on volume and timing and the assumption that nobody is watching closely enough. My brother was doing all of these things. I knew the pattern because I had seen it 100 times. I had just never seen it signed with a name I recognized from my childhood bedroom wall. The investigation moved faster than I expected. The second claim had a subcontractor invoice for emergency water extraction that listed a company I recognized immediately. It was a shell. The registered agent address was a mailbox at a shipping store 3 towns over. The phone number on the letterhead went to a voicemail that had never been set up. Our investigators cross-referenced the tax ID with state records and found the company had been registered 4 months before my brother started his business and had no other clients on record. The total amount across both claims, including projected payouts, was just under $140,000. What broke the case open was a third claim that my brother filed 6 weeks later at a property in a neighboring county covered by a different carrier entirely. That carrier's investigator and ours had attended the same fraud detection seminar the previous year. They compared notes. The subcontractor invoices from both claims used the same font, the same address format, the same made-up company. It wasn't even creative. It was the same template with different numbers plugged in. My brother had been so confident no one was watching that he hadn't bothered to vary his method. I was not in the room when investigators spoke to my brother's business partner, a man he had brought on 3 months in who had, by that point, figured out what was happening and was deeply interested in cooperating. I was not present for the conversations with the carriers or the preliminary findings meeting, but I was called into a meeting with our company's legal team and the lead investigator on a Wednesday morning, and I sat across a conference table from people I respected professionally, and I confirmed that yes, the policyholder was my brother, and yes, I had recused myself at first identification, and yes, the initial flag had been mine. The lead investigator said my recusal documentation was thorough and appropriate. The attorney said I had handled it correctly. I nodded and kept my face still and did not say anything about the voicemails or the group text or the 20 years of birthday dinners where I sat at the end of the table and watched everyone orbit around someone else. The part my family did not know, could not have known, because they had never asked a single question about what I actually did at work, was that I was also 3 months into a case that touched theirs from a different angle. My company had been retained as a consulting partner on a broader regional investigation into contractor fraud rings. I was not the lead, but I had full access to the case files. And when the investigators working that case pulled the financial records for my brother's company, what they found underneath the insurance claims was worse. He had been taking deposits from residential clients, sometimes $10,000, $15,000 up front, and either doing minimal work or none at all before the company's account went quiet. 6 families. One elderly couple who had given him $12,000 to renovate their bathroom and never saw a worker again. One single mother who paid $8,000 for a new roof and spent 3 months trying to reach him before filing a police report. My brother had been running a full operation. The insurance fraud was just the part that touched my desk first. I want to be honest about what I felt when I understood the full scope of it. It was not satisfaction. It was something quieter and colder than that. It was the specific feeling of watching a story you have been living inside of suddenly become legible. Like the whole thing had been written in a language you were learning, and you had just understood the last word, and now the entire sentence made sense in a way that made you feel sick and clear at the same time. My brother had never been the golden child because he was exceptional. He had been the golden child because my parents had chosen to believe in a version of him they had constructed themselves, and they had needed the rest of us to agree with that construction, and I had spent 20 years refusing to agree, and they had punished me for it. And now the construction was on the ground in pieces, and I had not been the one to push it. The morning everything came to a head was not dramatic in the way I had imagined it as a child, whenever I fantasized about justice being served. There were no chandeliers, there was no crowd, it was a Saturday. My parents had called a family meeting at their house, the house I had grown up in, the house they had nearly leveraged to co-sign my brother's credit line before the credit union deal came through. They did not tell me what the meeting was about. My mother said it was important and that I needed to be there. I went because Nate said you should go, and because I had already arranged to have 2 people present who my parents did not know were coming. My brother arrived late, which was typical. He walked in already talking, something about a project timeline. And then he saw the 2 people sitting in the living room with me, and he stopped talking mid-sentence. One was the lead investigator from our special investigations unit. She was there in a personal capacity, at my request, because I had asked her to explain what was coming to my parents before it became public record. The second was an attorney, not mine, not my brother's. She represented 2 of the families my brother had taken deposits from and then disappeared. My mother looked at me like I had brought strangers into her house to humiliate her. My father stood up from his chair. My brother said, "What is this?" And his voice had a pitch I had never heard in it before. High and thin and uncertain. I had spent my entire life watching him fill every room he entered with complete confidence, and the sound of that uncertainty was not something I had been prepared for. I did not give a speech. I am not a person who gives speeches. I looked at my brother and I said, "You need to sit down." He did not sit down. He looked at the investigator and said, "Who are you?" And she told him. He looked at the attorney and she told him who she clients were. My mother made a sound that was not quite a word. My father sat back down. My brother looked at me and said, "You did this." I said no. I said a flag in a database did this. I said 12 families who gave you money they couldn't spare and got nothing back did this. I said you did this. The investigator walked my parents through the findings the way she would explain it to any family. Clearly, without cruelty, without embellishment. The insurance claims, the fake subcontractor invoices, the deposit fraud, the estimated total exposure across all cases. My mother asked twice if there was a mistake. Each time the investigator said no. My father didn't ask anything. He sat very still with his hands on his knees and stared at a point on the carpet between his feet. My brother said nothing after the first 5 minutes. He sat in the armchair that had always been his at family dinners, the one closest to the television, the one nobody else ever sat in, and he looked at his own hands. The attorney spoke last. She was direct and not unkind. She said her clients were willing to negotiate restitution through civil channels before pursuing criminal charges, but that window would not stay open indefinitely. She left her card on the coffee table. She and the investigator left together. After they were gone, the 4 of us sat in the silence my family had spent years filling with noise and preference, and the ongoing performance of my brother's promise. My mother said I could have warned them. I said I didn't know the full scope until recently, which was true. I said I handled my professional obligations correctly, which was also true. My father looked up from the carpet and asked what happens now. I told him, I told him carefully and completely. The civil exposure. The criminal referral timeline. The fact that his cosign on the credit union line meant his name was in the financial records. The fact that the families who had been defrauded were not going to disappear. My mother started to cry. Not the kind of crying that is grief, but the kind that is the sound of a story falling apart. My brother said he needed a lawyer. My father said he needed to think. I picked up my jacket from the back of the couch I had never been allowed to put my feet on as a child because my brother had claimed that rule and my parents had enforced it selectively, and I said I was going home. My brother stopped me at the door, not aggressively. He stood in the hallway with his shoulders collapsed in a way I had never seen before and said, "Why? Not why did you turn me in, just why?" Like he was asking something much older than the current situation. I thought about it for a moment. I said because I was good at my job, and my job was to find what I found. I said because the people you took money from needed someone to find it. He said you could have looked the other way. I said I know. He said we're family. I said I know that too. I walked to my car. Nate was waiting in the driveway because I had texted him when I arrived, and he had driven over without being asked. That is the kind of person he is. I got in the passenger seat and he didn't say anything, just pulled out of the driveway and drove us home. I watched my parents' house disappear in the side mirror. The front window still had the same curtains my mother had hung when I was 9. My brother's old bedroom light was on. What happened in the months after was not a single moment but an accumulation of them. My brother retained an attorney. The criminal referral moved forward. The civil cases settled partially, and the families received some portion of what they had lost. My brother's business was dissolved. The credit union, called the line of credit. My parents spent several months navigating the financial fallout of having co-signed for a man who turned out to be, as my father said once in a phone call I will not forget, not who we thought he was. My father called me one evening in October. He didn't apologize exactly. He said he had been doing a lot of thinking. He said he believed for a long time that supporting one child loudly was the same as supporting both of them. He said he understood now that it wasn't. I listened to him say this without interrupting. When he finished, I said I appreciated him calling. He asked if we could have dinner sometime. I said I would think about it. He said that was fair. My mother has not called. I think she is still in the part of the story where the story is my fault. I have stopped waiting for that to change. Nate and I used part of our savings this past spring to buy a small rental property on the east side of town. It needed work, which was convenient. His crew had it done in 6 weeks. We rented it to a young woman and her 2 kids at below market rate because she was a nurse and the market rate was unreasonable and we could afford to make that choice. She sent us a card at Christmas. I have it on the refrigerator. Nate says I look at it more than I look at anything else in the kitchen. He is probably right. I think about what it cost me, all of it. The years I spent contributing to a family that subtracted from me. The mental real estate occupied by a brother who treated my steadiness as a resource to extract. The Saturday shifts at 17. The prom I missed. The $200,000 I refused to risk and was punished for refusing. I think about the word my father used when he asked me to support my brother. He said it was the least I could do. That phrase is interesting when you turn it over. The least you can do. As though my minimum obligation to someone else's dream was still more than I owed myself. I spent a long time believing that. I don't believe it anymore. I do not think of what I did as revenge. I did not engineer my brother's exposure. I followed procedure and moved out of the way and let the process work. The truth does not need much help when the conditions are right. It just needs someone to stop covering for it. That was the only thing I had ever really been asked to do in that family, and it was the one thing I had finally stopped doing. Not because I wanted to see my brother fall, but because I understood, at last, that you cannot protect someone from themselves without also absorbing the damage they are creating. And I had been absorbing it since I was 17 years old. I was done absorbing it. The last thing I want to say is this. If you are the person in your family who pays quietly, who shows up reliably, who gets called difficult when you ask for basic fairness, who watches someone else receive resources and praise and room to fail while you are expected to only succeed, I want you to hear this clearly. Your steadiness is not a tax. Your competence is not a debt you owe to people who gambled on someone louder. The fact that you built something real without anyone co-signing it does not make you less deserving of support. It makes you the only person in the room who ever actually believed in themselves. That is not a consolation prize. That is the whole thing. They spent 20 years calling me the difficult one. I have decided to keep the title.